Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me, your right hand will hold me fast. About 12 years ago, I saw some purple cards, and I got excited about it. I got excited about it for myself and for my children. I began to look at it more closely. We're going to share the chronology box and some more information about that with you, but first I want to tell you a few things about how that affected our family. My children were young. I got excited about what I was seeing, and I knew they would love it. My children love, particularly one of my children, does better with hands-on interactive types of activities, and I knew it would be a wonderful tool for him. I began to use it at home. At some point during that, some of the men in our congregation, a couple of the elders, a couple of the deacons, a couple of the Bible class teachers, men who were involved in writing curriculum, or not writing curriculum, but overseeing what was happening in our Bible class program, came and said, "We've heard about what you're doing with your kids at home and want you to tell us about it." At the time, I was not really comfortable yet answering a group of men's questions in a room about a chronology, and so I thought, well, I'll just take my daughter, let her show them, and I'll just sit down at the table and answer their questions. It seemed to me a good little cop-out for me. So we did just that. We went into a room, but what I had done with my children at home, at the point in our study where we were, is we'd taken the white famous people cards, and they were good at putting them where they belonged and talking about the white famous people cards with the purple cards. And so I had taken every name on the white famous people cards and put them on their own individual index card. I had used index cards. I put all the people in the lineage of Christ on a little blue card so they were distinguishable if they were in Christ's lineage. We began to add other people that were not on this group of white cards, other characters from God's story. So by the time we were showing this to these men, we had about 250 little white cards. I sat down at the table, we began to talk, and I had just said, Laura, we had the purple cards up. I said, Laura, just put the white famous people cards where you put them when we're doing it at home. Just kind of be putting them up there and let them watch you. So she did. She was 10 or 11, and we just began to answer questions. After a few minutes, she kind of tugged on my shoulder and said, Mom, and I said, well, you know what to do. Go ahead, I'm answering questions. And she was persistent. Mom. I said, what? And she said, one of these is wrong. You've got this on a blue card, and he's not in the lineage of Christ. And I had replaced a card that I thought was missing, and I'd put it on the wrong color card. One of our men at that point just stopped and said, I don't need to see anymore. And at that point, he was convinced that these were tools that were really valuable. And he said, I can't even do that myself. And this is one of the men who is one of my favorites to sit at his feet and learn when he is teaching Bible class. He's a marvelous Bible class teacher and extremely knowledgeable. But that was his response to what Laura was doing on the wall. And he said, how old are you? I can't do that. She was 10 or 11, as I said, and that was it. We began to look more and more into using the chronology in our classrooms, and for a year, we just did chronology drills on Wednesday nights for about 10 minutes in Bible class. It was a wonderful thing for us, and it was wonderful for my children, but I was excited for what I was getting. Nancy wouldn't say those things to you, I don't believe, but I can brag on it unabashedly, without hesitation, what wonderful tools they are and how enriched your Bible study will be by using them. And I just wanted to share that with you. I look to Jesus as I walk on waves to reach his side, but then I see the wind and I'm afraid I'll sink and die.
Hello, my name's Nancy Tumlinson. I'm from Houston, Texas, And I have come here today to tell you that many Christian women have a serious problem. They don't know the stories of the Bible, and or they don't know that all of the stories of the Bible combine to tell one larger story. Either we as Christian women are new Christians as adults and weren't raised on Bible stories, or we're second or third generation Christians who have heard the most familiar Bible stories all our lives, but haven't heard a pretty large portion of the stories, especially of the Old Testament in the Kings and Prophets, very much growing up, and aren't comfortable with telling those stories. Either way, whether we haven't heard the stories much, or don't know the stories well enough to give context and tell the stories to children, we many times don't know how to locate individual stories in the Bible in their larger context. The tragedy that grows out of this is that many women in the church aren't comfortable telling Bible stories and giving their context. They aren't comfortable telling these stories to their children or their grandchildren or the children of the church or the children of the community. And the epistles instruct us that older women are supposed to teach younger women to love their children. And one of the most important expressions of love for children is a desire to tell children about God and God's Word. We need to prepare ourselves so that we can enrich children's lives with Bible stories. Why do the stories of the Old Testament matter? What's so great about the Old Testament and Old Testament stories so that I should worry if I don't know about Hezekiah, or I don't know about Amos, or I don't know about Esther or Nehemiah or Ezra? Why should it matter if I don't know about the battles of Jehoshaphat? I want to spend a few minutes persuading you that Old Testament stories are critical to the development of the faith of children. I think that's almost a logical assumption because God worked providentially to preserve those stories for us. And martyrs died to preserve those stories and print those stories and translate those stories into languages of the people. A lot of people, and God through the Holy Spirit, exerted great effort to bring those stories to us. They must be vitamins God planned for us. I want to say that there are two reasons that I want to present for why we should know these stories. First, they're family stories about the family of Jesus. And second, they are stories that God intended to bring hope and comfort and patience and encouragement to us and to the children of the next generation. Let's start with family stories. I love family stories. I love telling family stories. I think it's good for children to hear about the sacrifices of the generations before and the bravery, the courage, the endurance of their ancestors. I happen to have married a man whose great-great-great-great-great-great uncle died at the Alamo. That would be a great story to tell the descendants of George Tumlinson, to talk about sacrificial courage. Young George Tumlinson rode into the Alamo through enemy lines when there was no hope, so that he could die with the people inside the Alamo. That's an exciting story to tell. I love the idea of telling about my father's father's father, who was Nathan Bedford Forrest's left-hand man, personal messenger, and horse doctor in the War of Northern Aggression. I think now most people call that the Civil War. Nathan Bedford Forrest was a genius, a cavalry genius, and a man of great courage. He rode his horse into Memphis when it was occupied by the Union Army, rode right up into the hotel where the main Union general was headquartered, rode his horse around in the lobby, probably did a rebel yell, and rode back out of town. Family stories are exciting stories to tell. That Confederate officer had a left-hand man, personal messenger, and horse doctor that was one of my ancestors. I want to tell you one more family story. There were little girls who lived out in the country in Mississippi many, many years ago. There was a family that had 7 girls. There was a neighbor boy who lived down the red clay road from where these girls lived. He had a cousin who came to Mississippi from Texas to visit. When this cousin came to visit, the local boy told him about the cute girls who lived down the road, and he wanted to meet them. So they walked down the road and visited for a while and then headed back home. When they started to go back home, and I have these words exactly from a source, the local boy said to the Texas boy, "Which one of those 2 girls that you met today did you think was the cutest?" And the Texas boy said, "Oh, that little one, if I never do get her." The local boy said, "You won't get her. Every boy in the county's after that girl." And the Texas boy said, "You wait and see what a Texas boy can do." That little girl married that boy. She had to wait a few months until her 14th birthday. When she married him, they had 10 children together, and the baby boy in that family was my father. I love that story. I especially loved that story in about 1978 when I met a boy from Texas and found out what Texas boys can do. I tell you that for a reason. These family stories. The Bible is a family story. It is the story of Jesus' ancestors. God picked a man named Abraham and a woman named Sarah who were as good as dead, and he said, "I'm going to give you a child, and from that child is going to come a huge family. And from that family is going to come great blessing for all of mankind." The blessing is going to be Jesus. And the Old Testament is the story of God keeping his promise to bring a great blessing through this family. And the Old Testament is a demonstration of what God can do. It is God saying, "I can make a family and I can take care of a family." Now, I want to say to you that when we tell those family stories to children, it increases their faith in God. God can make a family and God can take care of a family. When we get to the New Testament, we're going to find out that John the Baptist is going to indicate the family God ultimately has in mind is not just one genetic family. So John will say God could make sons of Abraham from rocks. And Jesus is going to say, "My brothers and my sisters are those who do the will of my Father in heaven." So the family is going to become a larger family. It's going to be a family of adoption. God is going to make a family. He's going to adopt a family to be Jesus' brothers and sisters and nieces and nephews throughout generations. When we are adopted into God's family, the stories of the Old Testament become our family stories. And these are stories that we can tell. And I have to pause to say, I don't care how excited you are about your own personal family stories. They aren't big enough for God's family. I'm going to illustrate that to you now by telling you that for many years my husband and I could not have children. And we adopted a little girl when she was 4 days old, and the next year we adopted a little boy when he was 5 days old. Immediately after that, I was expecting a child, and we had 3 in diapers. Our son is to a large part Hispanic. That means that his people may have died outside the Alamo, fighting with the pale people who were inside the Alamo. That story is not big enough for our family anymore. Our daughter, Jenny, our first child, is part black. Now, Nathan Bedford Forrest was very brave, but he was not always wise. I understand now that he started the Ku Klux Klan. Suddenly, that story is not the best family story imaginable. My children and all of the children of the world need larger family stories than our individual families can offer. But God has provided us with the best family stories. Now I can say to my daughter, when you cooked that meal, it made me think of Esther. She gave a feast and she saved her family. You are learning how to be one of the great women of the Bible. I could say that when Sarah prepares the food in the Bible. I can say to my son John, you know, when you told that untruth, you were afraid and you talked very quickly because you didn't have the courage to think, I ought to tell the truth here. Well, I know someone else who did that. Your great-great-great-grandfather Abraham did the same thing. When he got scared, the first thing he did was tell a lie. He got older and he became a great hero in the family of God, and you can too. Our children need these stories. God planned these stories for our children. We need to learn these stories so that we can give them. But I want to suggest a second reason why these stories are important. I think these stories are important because the stories of the Old Testament are stories about God. I used to always think they were stories about Abraham or Daniel or Ezekiel or Moses or Noah, and they are. And it's good for us to know people who followed God or didn't follow God, and we can learn from their heroic efforts or their mistakes. But every page and every story ultimately is about God, and God is the hero of history. And when we have the stories of the Old Testament, we have stories of Him acting in human history, and that gives us hope and comfort and encouragement. Romans 15 verse 4 says, whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning. In this context, the things that were written aforetime or before were the Old Testament stories. This says they were written for our learning. So now we might say, well, we should learn the stories of the Old Testament. But the verse goes on and gives us all the reasons in the world to be excited about and embrace the opportunity to learn and tell Old Testament stories. The verse continues, whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope. That says, if I will spend time in the Old Testament reading the stories of the Old Testament, I will gain patience, I will gain comfort, which is sometimes translated encouragement, and I will have hope. Why? Because the stories are about God. Knowing about God is encouraging, and it makes you hopeful, and it gives you patience to wait because He loves you and will answer your prayers and take care of you and care for you. How do I get hope and comfort and encouragement from the Old Testament stories? I want to suggest to you that in the New Testament, in the book of John, when Jesus makes wonderful promises about spiritual blessings, those promises are hard to imagine. They're hard to believe. He says that He can give you water and you'll never be thirsty again. He says He can enlighten you. He can give you light and you'll have moral clarity and direction. He says He can give you bread and you will never die if you eat that bread. He says He is winning the battle. I have overcome the world. The epistles say we will crush Satan under our feet shortly. Jesus says, I'm going to prepare a place for you. You can travel to heaven and be with me. He says, I'm making a family and you get to be my brothers and my sisters. How can we believe those promises? Well, the Old Testament is our school teacher that tells us the stories about God working in the physical world. God is good at light. He said, let there be light, and there was light. He takes away light for 3 days. He sends light in the wilderness to lead the family of Abraham. He stops the rotation of the planets when Joshua prays. God is good at light. You notice when I say good, that is an understatement. God is good at water. In the Old Testament, we have stories about parting seas, and we have stories about water turned to blood. We have story of an axe head floating. We have a story of Naaman and his leprosy is cured with water. The Old Testament is a collection of God can do water stories. The Old Testament is a collection of battle stories. God wins every battle. He wins a battle when Moses holds up his hands. He wins a battle when the Israelites walk. God defeats the Egyptian army. He wins a battle when Esther serves 2 meals. Her whole family is saved from destruction. I love the Battle of Jericho. Joshua walks around in circles with the Israelites. God wins the battle. I think that's a comforting story for mommies who run around in circles all day and trust God to win the battle for their children's souls. Gideon. I love the story of Gideon. Gideon, in effect, takes the band of 300 to defeat the professional football team of thousands. I say the band because they all carried trumpets into battle. God wins the battle. God wins the battle. God wins the battle. Hezekiah prays and 185,000 Assyrians die in the night. We pray, God wins the battle. The Old Testament is a gift to us from God to give us hope and comfort and encouragement. And now it is our job to convey that hope and comfort and encouragement to the children of the generations to come. There are some wonderful verses in the Psalms. In Psalms 145, the psalmist David says, I will extol you, my God, O King, and I will bless your name forever and ever. Every day I will bless you, and I will praise your name forever and ever. Great is the Lord, and greatly to be praised, and his greatness is unsearchable. One generation shall praise your works to another, and shall declare your mighty acts. One generation shall praise your works to another and declare your mighty acts. That sounds to me like telling stories from the Bible to children. I will meditate on the glorious splendor of your majesty and on your wondrous works. I will meditate on your wondrous works. Sounds to me like I will read and think about the wonderful things that God has done that are described to us in the Old Testament and the New Testament. So I will be ready to tell stories to the next generation. Listen to Psalm 71. This psalm says, O God, you have taught me from my youth, and to this day I declare your wondrous works. This says I heard those Bible stories when I was a child, and I started talking about them when I was a child, and I'm going to keep on talking about them as long as I can breathe. Now also, when I am old and gray-headed, O God, do not forsake me until I declare your strength to this generation and your power to everyone who is to come. That sounds to me like the author of the psalm is saying, I want to keep breathing because I'm not done doing what I'm supposed to do. As long as there are children who need to hear about how wonderful God is, please, God, keep me alive. Also, your righteousness, O God, is very high. You who have done great things, O God, who is like you? There is no one like God. There is no other job as wonderful or as important as the job of preparing future generations to praise our great and wondrous God. We have a problem. The stories are our family stories. The stories are the vitamins that give us light and hope and family and victory and comfort. And we don't know our family stories. But it won't be that way tomorrow if we decide to make some changes.
I think I can, I'll walk to reach his side. I think I can, oh no, I can't, the waves are much too high.
Many women of a certain age, of my generation, who were raised on Bible stories, have become very frustrated. They have been daughters of elders or deacons or preachers. They've been in Bible classes all their lives. They've studied Bible stories over and over and over again, and they do not know all the stories. They don't know where all the stories go in the big story of the Bible. They wish that weren't so, and they wish children of the next generations could be more familiar with Bible context, Bible chronology, where things come, who was first, what stories happened before other stories. And so there has been a big push, I think, for us to teach children the Bible in chronological order. We want to always start with Genesis and we want to go to Revelation, and if we'll just teach the Bible stories in chronological order, we can solve our problems. I'm sorry to say that I think, ironically, that does not solve the problem. The reason is that it takes a long time to tell all the stories of the Bible. You can't manage it in a quarter. It's worth of material. It takes 2 years maybe, or 3 years. And if it takes that long to thoroughly work your way historically through the Bible and tell the stories to the children, you have a new teacher every quarter. The second teacher doesn't know all that the first teacher taught. The fifth teacher in line doesn't know the things that have come before. The ones that are at the beginning don't tell to the end. The children hear the whole story, and they may hear the story in order, but it's over such a long period of time that they don't retain the things they had at an earlier time. It's a good study because they've heard the stories of the Bible, so it's not a tragedy at all, but it doesn't address the frustrating problem we've talked about. The frustrating problem is, I don't know how it all fits together. That, it seems to me, has to be addressed. Bible chronology and learning to find the order of things in the Bible and remember the order of things in the Bible needs to be taught as a separate subject. It needs to be addressed specifically. The way you learn Bible chronology is to drill Bible chronology. A wonderful friend in the past named Glenna Sloan worked with me some, and we wrestled with the notion of when we were teaching 5th and 6th graders, could it be possible that we could teach Bible chronology and drill Bible chronology the way you would drill multiplication facts or phonics, and have fun drills, not because it's the point of the Bible, but because it makes you so familiar and comfortable in the Bible that you could spend the rest of your life going all through the Bible and learning about God and all the stories He offered us. And we think we found out it's fun, and we think we have found out that it's very manageable, and that this is a skill that can be taught, it can be learned, it can be enjoyable. A few years after that initial work, a lady named Janelle Schoonover started to help me and made possible some production of materials to help children learn Bible chronology. She worked for 10 years tirelessly to help produce materials to help children. I'm going to show you these now and just show you some tricks we came up with, memory devices we came up with to help children retain Bible chronology.
But now I keep my eyes on him to walk with him each day. I'll walk with faith in his great power.
We'll start with a set of purple cards. Janelle made for us 9 purple cards. We tell the story of the Bible using these cards over and over and over with children. And by the time we've told the story 5 times or 10 times, the children have the story. If we do it week after week after week in Bible classes, they have the story for the rest of their lives. Let me show you how we would do this with small children. We say, before the world began, God made a great plan. He began to tell the plan little by little, starting with the first fathers and mothers. He picked one first father named Abraham. God says, Abraham, I'm going to make you into a big family. I'm going to give your family a special land. And from that family and from that land is going to come a great blessing for all of mankind. And God always keeps his promises. So he made them into a big family. Oh, but they're not in their special land yet. They're slaves in Egypt. We need a hero who will take them out of slavery to the edge of their special land. That's Moses. We need a hero who will march them into their special land. That's Joshua. We need heroes who will help them when they want to be good in the special land. The judges. Oh, but they don't want judges. They want kings. We're going to say kings like it's nasty. It's a bad idea. They want kings. The kings become wicked. The people become wicked. They become so wicked, God has to send them out of their special land. They're slaves again, this time in Babylon. We need some homesick heroes who will help them be good while they're far away from home so they can come home again. We need some home again heroes who will take them back to their special land. We knew they would come back to their special land. God said that family in that land would bring about a special blessing. And Jesus Christ is the blessing. And now I get to be a part of God's great plan. That was the story of the Bible. Every person that you read about in the Bible fits into that outline. Every event in the Bible fits into that historical outline. We will put up the purple cards. Every week when we come to Bible class, we will say the story of the Bible that goes with the purple cards exactly the same way. Every time the children come to Bible class, very shortly, they will be saying it with us and they will be saying it to us. I'll do the cards slowly, then I'll do the cards more quickly, then I'll do the cards and leave out important words like before the world began, God made a great plan, the children will yell. He began to tell the plan to the first fathers, the children will contribute. Won't be long before I'll mix up all the cards, hand them out to different children. They get to come up and put the cards in order. When we get the cards all up, it's time to start learning the famous people of the different historical time periods. We are not going to use this activity to show off our great abilities and what we know. We are not going to use it to intimidate people who don't know as many Bible stories as we do yet. We're going to make the Bible accessible to everyone. So we're going to start by having white cards that we will not call cheat sheets because we don't cheat, but we will call reference tools. We may not know all of the people who were first fathers, but we know that Adam and Eve were the first people. We'll have a list of the famous people of this time period, and gradually the children can learn more and more and more people of this time, the time of the first fathers, the stories that we find in Genesis and Job. We may not know everyone who was in the time of Moses, but Moses was in the time of Moses, and gradually we can say, oh, Moses had a brother named Aaron. Moses had a sister named Miriam, and we can even have some fun and drill. Would Moses have been able to talk to Jacob? No. Jacob must be a first father. Would Moses have been able to talk to Aaron? Yes, he would have said, hi, brother. He must be in the time of Moses. Would Moses have been able to talk to Adam? No. And so we can start with the children to play games to sort who would have lived in what historical time period. We may not know everyone in the time of Caleb and Joshua, but we know Caleb and Joshua. We may not know all of the judges, but we can learn some judges together, and it's a great opportunity for the children. The same way with the first fathers. We may not know all of the sons of Jacob, but we can have a lot of fun learning them together. We may not know all of the people who were homesick, but we might have heard of a boy, young man named Daniel, who when he was far away from home was faithful to God. I bet he was homesick when he was far away from home. Later we will learn more homesick heroes. We may not know anyone, hardly, from the home again period. If we do have heard of anyone, it might be Nehemiah. I like to remember Nehemiah by saying he probably had to get down on his knees working when he rebuilt the wall around Jerusalem. Nehemiah is the hero who came home to rebuild Jerusalem's wall. Now, why would you need to rebuild a wall? Because it had been torn down when the people were so wicked that they were taken away into Babylonian captivity, and their city and their wall were destroyed. So Nehemiah gets down on his knees to rebuild a wall when he came home again. I may not know everyone in the time of Christ, but I know Jesus Christ. And gradually I can associate people who were relatives of his, people who were disciples of his, apostles of his, and even people who hurt or betrayed him, famous people of that time period. While I'm talking about important people in the family of God in each historical time period, I want to emphasize to the children their opportunity to take their place in the family of God and do their part in God's great plan. Now, I skipped the time of the kings because I want to come back. Each of these other historical time periods are very manageable. If you want to learn the people and the stories of those historical time periods, they're very accessible. The people of the time of the kings, the most important people of the time of the kings, are much more elusive. Lots of kings, lots of prophets who prophesied to the kings. We struggle to find all these prophets, put them in the right context because of the way the Bible is compiled. As the Bible is compiled, we read about the first fathers, we read about Moses, we read about Caleb and Joshua, we read about the judges, we read about King Saul, we read about King David, we read about King Solomon. Then the kingdom divides, and we'll start to read about two kingdoms, a kingdom in the north and a kingdom in the south, and meanwhile in the north, and meanwhile in the south, and meanwhile in the north. And when we finish the history of the kings, Then we come to 17 books at the end of the Old Testament that are prophets who prophesied during the time of the kings, many of them. A handful prophesied later. Most of them prophesied during the time of the kings and fit into the history of the northern kingdom or the southern kingdom at some point, but it's much harder to remember and connect them to the proper kingdoms and the proper time periods. And so this is where our confusion comes, and this is where we'll spend a little bit of time, because I want to show you this can be taught, this can be learned, this can be remembered. And we'll work on this together in just a few minutes. Next, I want to show you some yellow cards that we've made. These yellow cards are the names for books of the Bible. Where would I go to read about first fathers? If I opened my Bible, I would turn to Genesis or the book of Job to read about first fathers. Where would I go to learn about Moses? Well, Moses' life starts in the first chapter of Exodus, and it ends in the last chapter of Deuteronomy. Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy will tell me about Moses. Where will I read about Joshua and the Judges? In Joshua and the Judges. Ruth will also take place in this historical time period. And the last judge is Samuel. The last two judges, Eli and Samuel, are told about in the very beginning of the book 1 Samuel. So in general, Joshua and the Judges are in the books Joshua and the Judges. Where will I go to read about Daniel, Ezekiel, and Esther, homesick heroes? Daniel, Ezekiel, and Esther. Where will I read about Zerubbabel, Haggai, Zechariah, Ezra, and Nehemiah? Ezra, Nehemiah, Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi will tell me about this historical time period. Where would I read about Christ and the people who learned about Christ and followed Christ? The New Testament. You could put all the books of the New Testament here. We didn't make that card, but you're welcome to. We were trying to sort all the books of the Old Testament, and that was our drill. I want to show you now the complexity that we're going to address. Where would you read about the times of the kings? These are the books in the Old Testament that tell us about this historical time period. So we have a little bit of a job, but we're not afraid. We'll keep going. What we hope the purple cards will do for you as a Bible class teacher or a mother at home telling Bible class stories to your child is we hope that it will give you a couple of possibilities for emphasizing chronology to children. First, you could start reading through the Bible with your child. I would recommend there's a Bible called the Daily Bible. It's edited by Legg Smith. It is arranged in chronological order, and that might be a good way to read stories with a child and tell stories to a child and tell the stories of the Bible. If you want to go through the Bible in chronological order, you might start and just read about Adam and Eve. Then what you could do is you could make little index cards with Adam's name and Eve's name and put them up. The children could even draw pictures of the story and illustrate your card for you. You could turn the card over and put Bible facts on the back, but you could make index cards for Adam and Eve. Then you could make a card for Noah and read the Noah story. You could talk about Abraham and Sarah. If you study through chronologically at home or in a Bible class, you could make cards and drill and have the white card here for the children to refer to until they don't need it anymore. But you could practice matching husbands and wives, putting characters in order. Then you can come to the time of Moses, do the same thing. Then you can have a game where you sort out who would have known Moses, who would have been first fathers and mothers. Add the time of Joshua and the Judges and just keep a sorting game going. Another, I think, great function for the purple cards is to tell the whole story of the Bible before you tell any Bible story to a child, because if you tell the whole story, then you give in context. You can say there were first fathers and Moses and Joshua and Judges and Kings and tell the whole story of the purple cards and then say, now today we're going to talk about one of the judges. And they have the story located within its historical context. When we were originally making the purple cards, we thought once we had the purple cards and the white cards and the yellow cards, we need cards for drilling so that the children could have a lot of fun practicing. And so we thought, well, we could make people cards. We could make great events cards. We could make, what could we do? We were struggling with possibilities for making cards that children could put in order. So we decided we could put battle stories of the Bible in order. We could put bread stories of the Bible in order. We could put light stories. We could put water stories. And so we just made cards on different themes. And this leads me to say to you that if you're studying, and it's not a chronological study with the children, it's a theme study, this is a wonderful way to get the emphasis that you get with a theme study. Suppose you were studying about honesty, and you wanted to pick out stories in the Bible that are about honesty. Or suppose you were studying about sharing versus being selfish. You might pick out all the sharing versus selfish stories. You could pick out one from the time of the first fathers. You could pick out from Moses. You could pick out from Joshua and the Judges. You could get the emphasis of, here's a sharing story, and this week another sharing story, and the next week another sharing story. The emphasis will be good for character building if you have that repetition, but you don't have to lose chronology. You can have both theme and chronology in one study. For example, if we were studying God wins the battles, I might have God wins the battle for Jacob. His father-in-law Laban is trying to cheat him, and he prays, and God wins the battle for him. The Israelites travel. God wins the battle and defeats the Egyptian army. Moses raises up his hands. God wins the battle. Joshua walks in circles. God wins the battle for him. We've talked about these stories, but you see that I can go in chronological order. I can emphasize God wins the battle, and I can study through and have the joy of the theme and the strengthening that comes with the theme with the rigor of chronological drill.
My eyes on him to walk with him each day. I'll walk with faith in his great power to keep me in his way.
We've said that if we want children to learn the chronology of the Bible, the order of the story of the Bible, the place of the events and the people in the Bible, we won't just teach Bible stories in chronological order, but we will drill chronology of the Bible. We're looking for ways to have fun and cause memorization. We'll start now with the first fathers. We're apt to remember Adam and Noah come early in the book of Genesis. Next comes the story of the Tower of Babel. I had trouble deciding in my mind early on and remembering which came first, Noah or the Tower of Babel. I've figured out how to help myself remember that Noah comes first based on the fact that Noah and his family would have spoken one language. The Tower of Babel created many languages. God confused the language of the people of the Tower of Babel, and many languages derived from the events at the time of the Tower of Babel. If the Tower of Babel came first, you would have the basis and the beginning of many languages. All the languages would have died with the flood. Since we have many languages without common ancestry, today the Tower of Babel comes after the flood. Next we have the patriarchs. The main men, the main husbands and wives of the book of Genesis are Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. We'll remember them and the order they come in with a memory device that will also connect Abraham to the promised blessing that comes from him, Jesus. We'll say Abraham is joined to Jesus. Abraham will be joined to Jesus by common descent and ancestry. And so we say Abraham is joined to Jesus, Abraham is joined to Jesus, Abraham is joined to Jesus, Abraham is joined to Jesus. We're going to get that important connection that Genesis is tied to the New Testament. It's all one story, the story of Abraham's family becoming Jesus' ancestors. So we'll say Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. You could say Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah. Judah is the brother of Joseph. There are two J brothers. Joseph is the most significant brother in the book of Genesis. He's the hero of the last portion of Genesis. But Judah is the direct ancestor of Jesus, so it might be nice to know both of those names. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Judah lead directly to Jesus. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph are the heroic figures in the book of Genesis. Lately, I've been drilling with the children to get the location. Also, we say Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph are in Genesis. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph are in Genesis. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph are in Genesis. And we get our order and we get those main heroic figures in the book of Genesis when we drill in that way.
He can, I know he can, he'll keep me by his side. I know he can, oh yes he can, he'll keep me by his side.
Let's learn some memory devices for the life of Moses. In the Bible, the life of Moses is recorded from Exodus through Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Moses is born in the first chapter of Exodus. He dies in the last chapter of Deuteronomy. We can learn what events in his life take place in what books with these memory devices. We say Exodus starts in E and goes to the X. When I was a child many years ago and we did maps in school, we would put an X anywhere there was a mountain. So I'm going to put an X for Mount Sinai. If you'll come here to the map, the book of Exodus covers the events from the birth of Moses in Egypt to his escape to the wilderness, where he sees the burning bush, his return to Egypt, the 10 plagues, the Passover feast, the Exodus, the crossing of the Red Sea, the journey in the wilderness to Mount Sinai. At Mount Sinai, Moses will go up onto the mountain, he will receive the law, he will receive instructions, they will build a tabernacle, they will organize themselves to travel toward the promised land. The book of Exodus, events in Egypt to the events at Mount Sinai. The book of Leviticus almost entirely is made up of laws and regulations and directions for the Levites. Easy to remember. Leviticus contains the laws for the Levites. Now, the priests are from the tribe of Levi. The one big event is the sad story of the two evil sons of Aaron. It's our bad priest story. Almost immediately after they're given their directions for how to offer incense to God, they offer strange fire and they die. The book of Numbers is called Numbers because it begins and ends with censuses, or the numbering of the people. We are going to take the name Numbers and use that to our advantage to remember the content of the book of Numbers. We're going to say the numbers are these: 12, 40, and 3. The numbers are these: 12, 40, and 3. The numbers are these: 12, 40, and 3. We'll continue our rhyme for the children by saying the numbers are these: 12, 40, and 3. And since the 3 is harder to remember, we'll explain who the 3 are. The numbers are these: 12, 40, and 3. Balak, Balaam, and his donkey. The numbers are these: 12, 40, and 3. Balak, Balaam, and his donkey. The 12 is to remind us that when the time came to leave Mount Sinai, this event is recorded at the first of the book of Numbers. As the Israelites left and moved toward their promised land, Canaan up here, God directed that they send 12 spies in to spy out the land. So 12 is to remind us that the Israelites headed for their promised land. They sent 12 spies into the land. Well, remember that 10 of the 12 spies were cowardly, and the people were convinced by those 10 cowardly spies that they could not conquer the land. Only Caleb and Joshua could see God and see that God was bigger than the Canaanites. So because of their lack of faith, their lack of courage, God caused them to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. They're going to wander in the wilderness for 40 years, and the events of that wandering are in the book of Numbers. 12 spies, 40 years. At the end of the 40 years, it's time to go into the land of Canaan. As they approach the land of Canaan, instead of coming in from the south now, they're going to come in from the east, and Moses is going to lead the people up through the territory of Moab. When the king of Moab sees them come through, he is nervous. They seem very threatening to him. This king's name is Balak. Now, Balak and Balaam have very similar names. So the way I remember which is the king and which is the prophet that the king consults, I remember to put the K with the king. Balak, with the children I'll say, King Balak, King Balak, King Balak. And they'll remember too. Balak asked a man named Balaam to come and prophesy doom for the Israelites. Balaam wants to, but must follow God's direction. God tells him not to go. He wants to go and goes on the journey. His donkey saves his life. That story was always very difficult for me to find in the Bible. I think the reason was because I want to find stories about kings, King Balak, in the books of the kings, and when I wanted to tell this story to children, I would go looking and looking and looking. It would take me forever to find it because it comes so early. So the nifty opportunity you have when you're drilling children is anything you have trouble remembering, you can put into your drills. And so I built Balak, Balaam, and the donkey into the drills because of my problems, and I don't have any problems anymore remembering and finding Balak, Balaam, and the donkey. The numbers are these, 12, 40, and 3. And the final book about Moses is Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy contains the last speech of Moses as the Israelites are camped on the edge of their promised land. So we'll remember Deuteronomy contains the death speech and the death story of Moses. Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Before we leave the life of Moses, I want to tell you a memory device that a 5th or 6th grade boy made up for us in Bible class. In the time of Numbers, when Moses informed the people of Israel that they were not going to be allowed to go into the promised land, they immediately complained. There was a cousin of Moses who led a rebellion, an unsuccessful rebellion against Moses, and he was swallowed up with his family in an earthquake. The memory device that our student came up with was Korah complained, and now I like to say cousin Korah complained and went to the core of the earth. Cousin Korah complained and went to the core of the earth. It's easy to remember what happened to Korah, how he behaved, the punishment, and that he was Moses' cousin.
Don't jump to conclusions, don't jump. Don't jump to conclusions, don't jump. Don't jump.
It's time to learn memory devices for the time of Joshua. When Joshua crossed over into the promised land, immediately he conquered Jericho. Of course, God won the battle. God told the people of Israel not to take any treasures out of Jericho, but there was a fellow named Achan who disobeyed God and hid treasures in his tent. The next city they went to conquer was Ai, And God did not fight for the Israelites because of Achan's sin. We remember about Achan and his connection to Ai and Jericho by saying, Ai, Israel is Achan. Because of Achan, Achan stole the treasure. Okay? So we'll say, Ai, Israel is Achan. Because Achan stole the treasure. All right? Joshua led the Israelites into the land, and they settled by tribes in the land. We have a memory device for remembering what tribe settled where in the land. I will mention two events before I start. The tribe of Dan originally settled in this location, but they migrated to the north. So we'll have Dan in two places. The tribe of Manasseh settled on both sides of the Jordan River. Half of the tribe wanted to live to the east, and half the tribe settled in the Promised Land proper. I had a couple of 8th grade girls who had fun this year and made this memory device for us. They chanted Manasseh, Gad, and Reuben, Simeon and Judah, Benjamin and Dan. Then came Ephraim. Manasseh is a car. Manasseh's not a car. Zebulun and Asher, Naphtali and Dan, conquering the land. Okay, I'll do it again. Manasseh, Gad, and Reuben, Simeon and Judah, Benjamin and Dan. Then came Ephraim. Manasseh is a car. Manasseh's not a car. Zebulun and Asher, Naphtali and Dan, conquering the land. The tribes of Israel, where they settled in the Promised Land. Let's learn the names of the judges. I'll mention before we start drilling the names that Deborah was one of the judges. Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah. And Deborah and another woman helped Israel defeat their enemies. The other woman was named Jael, and we remember Jael's name. We say with Texas accents, Jael and the Nayel. She killed the horrible oppressor of Israel by driving a tent peg through his head. We call that tent peg a nail, a large nail. And we say, Jael and the nail stopped Sisera. Jael and the nail. All right? We are going to drill the judges. I like to get children up and marching, and we say, Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah. Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah. You can hear the accent again, I think. Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah. And we'll just march and say that over and over and over, and then we'll add a little more. We'll say, Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah. Gideon, Abimelech. I've got to stop to say that we have Abimelech in our list of judges. He was not truly a judge. He is in the book. He has a chapter in the book. He has a horrible story. He is a son of Gideon. He kills all the rest of Gideon's sons he can lay his hands on, all except one. Tries to make himself a king and really destroys himself and the people who work with him with his horrible, horrible behaviors. He was not one of the judges God chose to help the Israelites when they wanted to behave. So we'll say, Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah. Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah. Gideon, Abimelech, Ek. Gideon, Abimelech, Ek. Gideon, Abimelech, Ek. We'll start over. Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah. Gideon, Abimelech, Ek. Tola, Jair, Jephthah. Ibzan, Elon, Abdon. Samson, Eli, Samuel. And we'll march around. Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah. Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah. Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah. Gideon, Abimelech, Ek. Tola, Jair, Jephthah. Ibzan, Elon, Abdon. Samson, Eli, Samuel. If we leave those pauses, we can get the marching to work for us.